Let me show you something worth noticing. There's a kind of tension that shows up once someone crosses a certain threshold with money, and almost no one talks about it directly. It doesn't arrive with fanfare. It doesn't feel like a problem you're supposed to have. But it sits there, quiet and persistent, like a low hum you can't quite locate. You hit a number you once thought would feel different. Maybe it's six figures in savings. Maybe it's a paid-off mortgage. Maybe it's the kind of portfolio that technically means you don't have to work anymore. And instead of relief, there's something else. Not panic, not fear exactly, but a kind of vigilance that never quite turns off. You start watching the balance not because you need to, but because you can't stop checking if it's still there. It's not about whether the money is enough. It's about whether it will stay enough. And that question doesn't have a finish line. People who don't have money assume the anxiety ends when you get it. That once you reach a certain level, the knot in your chest loosens and you finally exhale. But what actually happens is stranger. The anxiety doesn't disappear. It changes shape. It becomes about preservation instead of acquisition, about not losing instead of gaining. And in some ways, that's harder to live with because there's no moment where you can say you're done. You start noticing things you didn't before. Market corrections feel personal. Headlines about inflation or tax policy land differently. You calculate how long your money would last in different scenarios, even when there's no immediate threat. You run the numbers again late at night, not because anything changed, but because the act of checking feels like control. And the irony is that the more you have, the more variants there are to worry about. More accounts, more positions, more ways something could go wrong. This isn't paranoia. It's not irrational. It's the predictable psychological cost of holding something valuable that you know can fluctuate. Once you have enough to lose, loss becomes a category your mind organizes around. You're no longer imagining what it would be like to have security. You're imagining what it would be like to lose it. And that shift is invisible to everyone around you, including the version of yourself that used to think money would solve this. There's a specific moment when this sets in, and it's usually not the moment you expect. It's not when you first see the big number. It's later, after a few months, maybe a year, when the novelty wears off and you realize the number is now yours to defend. That's when the responsibility starts to feel heavy. Not the responsibility to spend it wisely or invest it well, though that's part of it. The responsibility to not be the person who had it and then didn't. To not be the cautionary tale. And here's what makes it so isolating. You can't really talk about it. If you try, it sounds like complaining about a problem most people would happily trade for. And maybe it is. But that doesn't make it less real, so you stay quiet. You manage it privately. You check the accounts when no one's looking. You run the scenarios in your head while nodding along to a conversation about something else. And you learn to carry it the way people carry most internal things, by acting like it isn't there. What's happening underneath is something economists have studied but rarely name in plain terms. It's called loss aversion, but that phrase doesn't capture the texture of it. The technical version says that losing something hurts roughly twice as much as gaining the same thing feels good. But in lived experience, it means that once you have money, your emotional baseline recalibrates. The presence of money becomes normal. The absence of it becomes unthinkable. And your nervous system treats any threat to it as a threat to your identity, your safety, your future. Not because you're fragile, but because that's how human attention works when stakes are attached. This rewiring happens automatically. You don't choose it. You don't even notice it happening until it's already done. And once it's in place, it's very hard to undo, because it's not a belief you can argue yourself out of. It's a pattern your mind has learned to run in the background. You become a person who monitors, who hedges, who feels a small spike of adrenaline when a statement comes in lower than expected, even if the difference is trivial. Some people describe it as feeling like they're standing on a floor that could drop out at any moment, even when the floor is solid. Others say it's like holding something fragile that everyone assumes is indestructible. A few admit, only in private, that they felt safer when they had less, because there was less distance to fall. And that admission, more than anything, reveals how disorienting this psychological position is. The thing you work toward becomes the thing you're constantly bracing against losing. It doesn't help that the world tells you this isn't supposed to be hard, that wealth is freedom, that once you have it, you've arrived. And in some ways, you have. But arrival doesn't mean the end of difficulty. It just means a different set of difficulties, ones that are harder to name because they don't fit the script. And so you keep going, you keep managing, you keep checking, because what else are you supposed to do? There's no real resolution to this, no amount of money that makes it stop, because the mechanism isn't about the amount. It's about the gap between having and not having, and that gap exists at every level. Someone with 10 million can feel it just as sharply as someone with 1 million, because the mind scales the fear to match the stakes. The numbers change. The vigilance doesn't. What sometimes helps, though no one talks about this part either, is recognizing that the feeling isn't a sign you're doing something wrong. It's a sign that you're human, holding something your brain has correctly identified as worth protecting. The anxiety isn't a flaw, it's a feature. And once you stop interpreting it as a problem to solve, it becomes a little easier to carry. Not gone, but less consuming. Less like a warning and more like information. You start to notice that the people who seem most at ease with money aren't the ones who stopped caring. They're the ones who learned to expect the hum, who made room for it without letting it run the show, who checked the balance when it made sense and then put the phone down, who accepted that some part of them would always be watching and decided that was okay, because vigilance isn't the same as fear. It's just attention. And attention, when you're holding something that matters, is reasonable. The silence around this makes it worse, because when no one says it out loud, you assume you're the only one feeling it. You assume everyone else figured out how to relax, and you're the one who can't let go. But that's not what's happening. The room is full of people carrying the same quiet weight, all of them pretending it isn't there. And maybe if more people admitted it, the weight wouldn't feel quite so personal. It would just be part of the deal, part of what it costs to have something you didn't used to have. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's next.